Okay, before I get reading,
Jesus Christ.
I don't think he liked me very much.
Huh?
I don't think he liked me very much.
It's because how dare you, as a woman, speak and tell him he's wrong? Just because men are progressive doesn't mean that they don't uphold their own misogynistic. We've talked about this.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's like,
As I
no,
was
you
hanging out, as
cannot.
I was getting off, that's why I didn't want to talk. That's why I don't talk religion, y'all. Like,
That's what he said.
that's why you can't undo your white supremacy.
Exactly. Like, it's so weird because he's like, I deconstructed. And I'm like, no, you did not. Like, first of all, deconstruction takes forever. And majority of the time, we drinking something colorful with it. And on top of that, it's like, yeah, like you said, like you can't
So
deconstruct.
tied together.
They're literally like on top of each other. Because I'm just like, okay, take away people of color. Take away, like, go back to when it was like Queen Victoria versus Queen Elizabeth time, right? Like, what was their like basis on who was allowed to rule?
Right. Yeah. And even then, I mean, you dipped out, or else I would have stayed and pulled up the indigenous people history of the United States, where it clearly draws the line between Christianity in Europe and specifically looking at the Spanish Inquisition and the colonization of Ireland. Those two places specifically is where they came up with this idea that as we come in and you start becoming Christian, we've got the old Christians versus the new Christians. And guess what color the new Christians were?
A little brown. They're a little spicy.
They're a little brown. They were a little bit brown. And in which case they made that separation first. And that's how the Crusades got involved. And you had all these people go over, and you came back from the Crusades, and you were allotted land. Where did the land come from? From the brown people that they kicked out of the country.
Exactly.
They kicked out of Spain. And why? But you got it because you were Christian. So you get. They're tied. They're tied.
Like this manifest destiny. Like, does he not know what that is?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it's like, why did the like old, like you said, why did the old Christians or like God-loving people get more?
Right.
Why was the hierarchy created?
And the fact that it's colonization. I'm like, what was the driving force of colonization? There was money, yes. But money wasn't going to everybody. So the rest was for God. Remember when all the little missionaries came over, the little Jesuits came and like baptized all of the indigenous people and gave them names like Jesus and Jorge and Maria? That whole thing.
Like, how do you think, what it was the biggest biggest tool used to colonize?
Right? Right?
Again,
You can't. They're so tied. They're so tied. Like, now, whether you keep your God, however that's going to look, I don't know what it's going to look for people.
Yeah.
But I just know they're going to hit a wall. People who are deconstructing white supremacy, they're going to hit a wall that is their God. And they're going to have to decide, is it my God that's telling me to do all this racist shit? Or is it the institution that's telling me? And then you've got to deconstruct that part too. Or you deconstruct the institution and then you lead to this. One way or the other.
It will
they're
come.
so enmeshed.
Yeah. But again,
which is why you can have people who've deconstructed religion and who are still fucking racists.
Oh, yes, exactly. They're like, no, I walked away, but did you?
Did you?
Did you?
Because you sure still sound like a white supremacist.
Exactly. You
And so
definitely.
much of that is because we don't like to hear those words. We don't want to hear white supremacists because we think men in hoods and crosses.
And how dare you call me a racist? Like, I didn't call you that N word. I'm not marching out with the hood on. And I'm like, yeah, but you are ensuring that my people and their kids will never have food by simply marking down a circle on a piece of paper. And you thought
Right,
that that wasn't a weapon, but it is.
right,
But no one saw me actually harm you. I didn't physically beat you. I didn't do anything to you. Yeah, you just sent somebody else to do the job for you, just so that you can seem like the less harmful person.
right. Or that even, not even that, like I didn't send anybody, but I sure as hell didn't stand up.
Exactly.
My silence is what kept things going. My
Exactly.
silence is what condones it and keeps and upholds it. Because the when you think about the noisy white supremacists, the violent, the outright violent people, they are not as many as just the rest of us.
Yep.
The rest of us are just quiet. And we can look at those violent people and say, see, I'm not that.
At
Don't
least I'm not.
don't put me with them.
Exactly. It's
So
not
therefore it
all
makes it so
violent.
I don't have to deconstruct. They are a handy tool.
Yes. They're powerful. Because, like, and I bet, like, literally, like, as the government, they know exactly what they're doing with that. They need the loud ones so that the quiet ones don't feel as bad for
Right?
just allowing the harm to happen. Or they're just like, at least I'm not as bad as them. They know what they're doing.
Yeah, there's a reason why Trump's administration is going to label the protesters
Oh, yeah.
as T groups,
Oh,
but
yeah.
not the white supremacist groups.
Exactly.
Those ones he's not going to label, but
Oh,
the protesters,
absolutely. Absolutely.
because
But
they're handy tools to keep around.
yes, they
Those
are.
you gotta have your stick
Hmm.
to to help keep people in compliance.
Exactly.
Is stick and carrots.
Exactly.
And when the white people start getting uppity because they're not getting carrots, then we're going to stick the stick on them too.
Hmm.
Because and
But
part of the
again,
stick
the
is to
silent
say like,
ones.
see how awful we can treat people like these. You
Yes.
don't want to be with them, so you better stick on my side or stay quiet, or else I'm going to put you over with them, and then we're going to do to you what we're doing to them. And white people go, "You're right. That's the white supremacy in us."
Yep. Even before you like came in, we were talking before we even got to religion, colonization. And this dude was being stupid and said that if I get one more white tea man saying that I'm being racist against them because I've hurt their emotions, I'm losing my goddamn mind. I'm like, so racism to you is hurt feelings, while racism towards me and my people is literal unalivement. Trust me, you're not experiencing racism. Like, excuse me. But anyway, so yeah, this guy was like, "You're hurting my feelings by telling me that like I'm not the savage that my ancestors actually are." And so crying like a little bitch. So he left, and then we started like talking about like helping others deconstruct or whatever. I've given up. I'm just like, give me the colorful juices and let me be. you know? But yeah, so
Right?
like thanks for the gifts. But like he was just like, well, I don't wanna like step on their feet. I don't wanna
Well,
like
that's hard.
hurt their feelings.
Well,
And
then
that was
how can you say you've deconstructed white supremacy? That is literally right
right.
to comfort.
Exactly.
You haven't
Exactly.
deconstructed anything. If
And
you're
you
still worried about hurting people's feelings.
exactly. That's why he was essentially saying too with the religious like religion conversation. He was just like, well, like, they really believe in that. Like, I don't want to break their hearts because, like, their worldview will, like, break. I'm like, I will break everybody's worldview as long as it saves people's lives. Why in the world should I make sure that you are comfortable when literally people are being G-sided on the other side of the world because of your belief? And people like you believing in the things that you believe in. Why is your comfort justified with my suffering? And so that's why he kept saying, he was just like, well, like, I don't want to step on their toes. I don't want to step on their toes. I don't want to step on their toes. And I was just like, that's why I went silent, because I was just like, you literally see, I promise you, as you see me as an aggressive woman already. And like at this point, I own it. Yes, I am aggressive. I'm hostile. Come at me. And so like, I'll make that my superpower. Say less. But like, literally, like, you're never, like, you're a white man too. And just because you're progressive doesn't mean that don't have work to do. And we all do. We all do.
God,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. Like,
So
we
much
all
work to do.
Yeah. And so he was just like,
And
literally, I'm like, you will never listen to me because I will scream, I will shout, I will yell. You have a boot on my like throat. Take it off. And he's like, but like someone gave me the boot though as a gift, and I don't want to hurt their feelings, so it has to stay.
it's not my boot, and I don't want to hurt my friend. I don't want to
Exactly.
make them feel bad about putting a boot on you, and so
Exactly. So like, you good, right? They're comfortable. You good.
it does.
Like, you're not unalived. You're still there, at least, right? Like, if they push harder, then I'll say something. Like, guess what? The boot is still on my neck.
Right. Red flags for Greg.
Uh-oh. Who's
Greg
Greg?
comes in and listens to me read my book.
That guy named Goblin needs to come read your book with you, too.
All right. C wanted to have something to say. I wanted to make sure that I talked to you a little bit before I do my reading, but because that was
Beautiful.
Hi, C. Tell me about yourself.
Hi, 35 he, him. Thank you, Black Magnolia. I am a YT cishet guy who continues to see on a daily basis the harm my demographic continues to cause, and it's utterly disgusting. Like, I know I come from the most problematic demographic, and I am a leftist, but just inherently being a leftist doesn't abstain me from my own biases, etc. It's just like I'll be deconstructing until I'm 6 feet under. And until my demographic changes and evolves, we're going to continue to have these conversations, sadly. Like, every single one of us needs to educate ourselves and do better. Maybe I was privileged enough to take, I forget at this point, 4 or 5 women in gender studies courses, despite being a physics and math guy. I took the first one because I had to, but I took the rest because after the first one I was so fascinated by it. I just took more, and it really opened my eyes up. Like, I've always considered myself an intersectional feminist even before taking, but it was very, very eye-opening.
Yeah.
Same here. I just learned that feminism is out. Now it's womanism. So, see, still learning. Like, still learning. So,
Yeah, I think that's because we needed to find a different label and everything. I think that when it comes to social justices, we go through learning curves. We take it and because we're unpacking 400 plus years of white supremacy that is American culture, plus 1,000 plus years that is just supremacy. We're going to find layers upon layers upon layers, and it's just, I think that when I went and was sitting with, I went to a racial justice class and learned a little bit about the history and epigenetics and things like that. And one of the things that he says, the Royal Star, is his name. He said it's going to take 2 or 3 generations before we start to see the changes in epigenetics in white people and people of color as well. And it's going to be right now we can't have any of those changes because white people are holding on to it so hard, and because we're not doing the work that is needed to unpack the white supremacy that is part of American culture. It is just who we are. I mean, the fact that white is a term of race identifying that came from the colonizers, the colonists that came over here. That's where we see it come. Before then, it was just Christian supremacy. But it was, well, I think the American culture is white supremacy culture. I think white supremacy culture is what American culture has been. So we have to dismantle that to be able to come up with something better, because right now it's so unhealthy. The idea of being American is not something I can be proud of, because it's so entangled with white supremacy.
I apologize for interrupting you there. I just want to go back to something that Black Magnolia said a second ago. I feel like BIPOC women, being a guy, I cannot be a womanist. And I feel like womanism is more, from what I've gathered, is more to BIPOC women. And as a guy, I can only be an intersexual feminist. I cannot be a womanist from what I have learned. I may be wrong, but that's just what I've learned, etc.
White supremacy is a culture, and you can have culture within a cult. So, yes, it is. And womanism is just pretty much. I'm also learning, so I can't really correct you too much on this. So something we'll definitely have to cross paths on and discuss some more on what we've learned. But essentially, womanism is just more inclusive when it comes to women's rights. And so it's a lot. I think it's actually more associated with like the lack of, well, in feminism, there's a lot of like exclusion of like trans women and like other like trans women, and of course like people of color and Black women, right? But mainly I think the biggest one was actually trans women, and there's a lot of feminists, unfortunately, who like lean more that way. But like as like a concept, like when you go to the definition of feminism, it is more like equity between genders, right? But if you're like non-binary, see, it's not inclusive. So womanism is the inclusion of everybody. So it's not really isolated to like your race. It's just the belief of a more inclusive ideology associated with the equity between genders and non-binary people and all those things. So yes, you can be a womanist.
Oh, you're muted,
You're
fam.
muted.
I did mute myself because I was burping.
I thought you
And
were
I don't want to
reading
burp in your
something to us.
ears. No, I was just saying I don't know anything about womanism, so it's a new term I'm having to look up. So, hi Des, how are you?
Hey, I'm hanging in there. I'm doing all right. How about you?
Good. I'm doing all right. I'm doing okay.
Yeah.
Pearl, my friend down here, Black Magnolia, was in a live and pinged me, so I came in and yep. So now I'm over here. It went as
That's awesome.
expected.
That's great.
So,
Yeah. Well, I just want to come up to discuss, like, to talk about the difference between it being a cult and culture, and part of the process that needs going through in this detoxing and deconstructing and decolonizing is separating oppression from culture and that conflation, because that's what abusers do on purpose, is conflate very specifically that thing, right? Trying to conflate abusive practices, try to conflate it over to, air quotes, being a tradition, and thus being something that has viable stinks to hold on to. And it doesn't, right? Like we need to, all whiteness is a cult, and thus is just oppression. And so having culture is part of actually having connection to practices that help you live life. And cults are the vilification of that actually take life from others so that you're not living your own life. So it's a very important distinction, and that's why I try to spread that around, right? Whiteness is just a cult, and to say that it's a culture actually gives it more credence than what it is. So that's all.
so what about sorry, I was just because I don't remember the name of the scholar, Tima Okun, who outlined the white supremacist culture characteristics and the tenets of white supremacy.
Yeah, it's part of actually like evolving the understandings of systems that we have, and how progress as part of social sciences, right, is not only the etymology of words and how they grow and transform based on the understanding and culture and the direction that we're trying to head, but it's also about the new understandings that we come to and making sure that we're factoring that into the ways that we have looked at things and changing that to be more of what we actually want to be, right? So in saying that these things are cultural practices, is giving it a credence of connectivity in the sense of actually giving life. That's why it's a death cult, right? Like both Christianity, whiteness, racism, a lot of these things are death cults because it's an ideology wrapped around erasing demographics of humans that exist. And so it's not based on a cultural connectivity. It's actually based on the ideology of taking life. And that's then what makes it a death cult versus a culture that actually is about the enhancement of life and safeguarding, like things that we have learned through our ancestry, for example.
I have a question then, just a clarification.
Sure, no problem.
So, are you saying cultural things generally are things that are leaning more positive to enhance like a people?
Yeah, it's about actual healthy ways of existing. Yeah. And connecting with one another versus what is a cult, which is actually the opposite of that. And the conflation of those things has been historically done for the sake of normalizing abusive behaviors, in this case on a societal level, oppressive systems. So it's one of the conflations that's done. You know what I mean? Just like when Christians are controlling, but they call it love because part of their ideology is the forcing of these things is for the betterment of people, and that conditions them to erase the person in front of them for the sake of what they believe is right, which is their superiority complex based on morality, right? So the same thing is applied then to race and racism when it gets to it's actually and Christianity is also a cult because it's an ideology, right? And this is also a cult because it's an ideology versus actual healthy practices of existing, right? When you gain understanding from your heritage, from your ancestry, from those that you actually invest in and spend time with, you're actually building healthy relation. And that actually fills you, that actually helps you navigate, live, discover, self-discover life, right? Cults are designed and built around the ideology of taking it.
I think that, I guess what I'm struggling with is there's lots of cultures out there, corporate cultures, community cultures, lots of people who have cultures that are not healthy.
Right, those are all
And
cults.
so I don't see those as, I don't see that as a separating line.
Well,
And
those are all cults, not cultures. It's part of the conflation of that word.
See, I would also challenge that. It would depend on what definition we are using when it comes to those terms, culture and cult.
Well, I'm also looking at it from a social science perspective, not just the definitions. So it's about a working understanding of the application of those things. Right, because just like the other examples that you were giving, it's part of the reinforcement of the conditioning of thinking that those cults are actually cultures. Like, because they call them cultures because they're trying to say that they're a benefit, right? These are the healthy corporate cultures that we have, when it's actually just about taking your life, because that's what they're doing, right? They're forcing you into a 9 to 5 to take your life for existing. It's part of capitalism, which is also an exploitative, oppressive system, right? And so they're conflating the understanding of what is healthy connection or what is actually life taking, right? It's not healthy connection, it's toxic connection.
when I think about white supremacy, though, specifically, um, the fact that you to become considered and to take on that mantle of whiteness and have the safety that comes with that label, many people had to give up their cultures. Many migrants, many
Correct.
people who came over, they gave up their cultures for white supremacy.
Yes.
So they they did get a culture. It just was a bad culture because they gave up their other
No, they,
culture.
well, no, they gave up their culture for self erasure, for a cult, right? That's literally what a cult is giving away your identity to an ideology that isn't who you really are, so that someone can take it and manipulate it. It's literally a cult. So you literally, that's the whole point of all of this, is giving up self-identity, giving up your culture for the sake of a cult, ascribing to an identity that takes the life of others actively. And that's why it's a death cult.
I think that personally, I don't like associate the words themselves, like especially culture. I'm gonna stick to culture. Culture being either like associated with good or associated with bad, especially since there is a difference in culture with and what like the performance of culture. So to me, like if somebody is doing their cultural thing, it could like seem evil, right? Like, oh my goodness, like black magic or something, not recognizing that within their culture, like they are performing this act to uphold something that's more positive. And so I do not isolate culture only like being good, and more thinking like in its like generic definition, and then also like
Excellent.
you utilizing like sociology's term or just where's the definition coming from, like, and its elaboration for you.
Right. It's not about definitions. That's why I was trying to point out it's a social science. It's about the working application. Just like when you're doing a report, right? You're not just going to turn in the definition of a word. You're actually compiling an understanding of those things coming together and how they function. And I didn't give it a good or bad, right? And because that's just too simplistic and it's part of the binary that points back to part of the manipulative tools that oppression uses, right? Because humans are nuanced and unique in like a gajillion different ways, right? And so to create a binary is actually part of the erasure and part of abusive behavior that gets normalized. So it's not about it being good or bad. It's about what's healthy and what's harmful, right? And so to say that something is justifiably harmful for the sake of it being part of one's culture is part of the normalization of abusive behaviors that has gotten us to this point in the world, and not just with racism, but like spin-and-ism, and we can walk down the road of that, right? So it's about the like I guess they would say today in academia, the applied science of the understanding of how this all functions and works together, and putting forth like just a clearer understanding of the realities of what it is that we're dealing with, which is why these are all studies that continue on. Like we've come far, and hopefully we keep going further, for example. Hope that clears it up. But yeah, it's not about like good or bad. It's about healthy and harmful, right? The healthy connection that actually helps you, empowers you to live your life, versus the things that are actively harming others and yourself, because they're going to do both when it's a cult, right? It's going to harm the person that's participating in it, like you mentioned, of the self-erasure that happens when ascribing to it. But you're worse, you are doing that by and holding on to that ideology by inflicting harm unto other people, right? In the example of racism, right? What whiteness has done to blackness. And even just the understanding of how whiteness is just the oppression because it's the oppressor class, while black and blackness has gone through the reclamation process of a people that are harmed and removed, right, from self and identity because of this ideology, have reclaimed it and formed a new understanding of actual culture to it, which is one of the things that obviously oppressors try to use today, is when they just try to do like a one-for-one comparison. Well, you can't do that because black and white are not one-to-one comparisons at all, in how they came to be and in how they exercise themselves. So it's just about the nuance of unpacking all the shenanigans.
So when does a cult become a culture then? Because if we've been having this white supremacist cult for thousands of years, because it ties back to Christianity supremacy in Europe,
It doesn't.
I mean, my culture is so far back that it's erased. Like I have no way of knowing the people that my lands belong to, the land that my people belong to.
Sure you do. Like if honestly, if Africans that have been spread across the planet can, pretty much anyone can. And white people most of all, because of how meticulous your ancestors kept records, right? So it is about going back that far.
But they didn't keep accurate records until they were part of Christianity. So they gave up that record keeping. They didn't do that until they were part of this cult. So my culture, my people are gone. I don't know who my Swedish ancestors are. I know they came from Sweden. That's all I know. But as far as their indigenousness, I don't know.
Right, but that's what you dig into, and just dig into the regions. Like all of me has been erased, right? If you're going to look at it from that perspective. But the active process of reconnecting is doing that work, is digging into it and discovering it so that you can piece together actual like healthy history, right? So it's just going back as far as you can and building on the healthy things that were given versus the cult, because a cult never becomes culture. Its literal purpose is to take that, to erase that. So it never transmutes into being culture. It's just going to keep taking. Because once you transmute it, then it is no longer a cult. You're then connecting to culture. But that's how you get out of it, is by finding your heritage and reconnecting to what it is that you gave up.
I'm
gonna have to sit with it. I'm gonna have to sit with it because it's
Sure. Yeah, these are all big things.
I
Because
challenge.
what I'm saying is not, it's not a matter of when my indigenous people, like I said, I don't know who my, because there were many indigenous tribes in Sweden before it became Sweden. There were so many, but now like they're gone. Their culture is gone. They don't have records. There are no stories. There are no myths. There are no oral records because they are gone. Because 1500, 2000 years ago, they assimilated to whiteness. So I don't have a culture to go back to because they were G-sided 2000 years ago. So I don't think I can not say that my whiteness is my culture when I don't have a culture to go back to because literally my culture was erased.
Well, whiteness doesn't go back that far. Like I actually do have Swedish ancestry, ironically enough, and but the same thing with like my African ancestry is that once you can kind of get to a location, then you start piecing together based on family stories. Because this is when like the glorification of the written word when it comes to white supremacy is a problem because a lot of indigenous people were using oral ancestry. And so it's about coupling the research that you do with family stories that you might have. And if you don't have any family stories, then just looking at regions and following your instincts about what is speaking to you about those locations and that place and following it back because all of this is about building your identity. It's about self-discovery and building who you want to be, right? And so it's not like because and it's entirely possible, right, with genocide that happens, right, that there is an erasure there, and but the thing is that you're here, right? So there are remnants, and it's the same thing. Like I'm Afro-Indigenous, for crying out loud, right? And so I've been so removed from every facet of who I am, but you dig and see what you find, because especially when it comes to European sides of things, there's a lot more to dig through and find to piece those things together than there is for Indigenous and African people. And the fact that I've been able to do that across the board on all of those things, and many people do, right? And that's honestly a big movement that is happening right now in this awakening of deconstruction, is that more and more people are doing that, and more people are bringing to light things that have once been forgotten, intentionally and intentionally hidden as well. So, yeah, like I would just say before, like dig into it. Take some time and dig into it for a while.
I have a question, if that's okay for Des. Hi, Des. I'm Renee.
Nice to meet you, Renee.
Nice
Sure,
to meet
you
you
can.
too.
I don't mind.
Yeah. So when I'm kind of thinking through what you're talking about, what comes up for me is that, and this is what Sarah was kind of just talking about, is that like so much of culture gets erased, right? That's the nature of the cult that did the erasing. It's trying to do that. So is our culture, when our cultures are built as a reaction to the cult, is that also toxic?
Well, it depends, right? Because that's one of the reasons why it's so important to deconstruct, so that you can build, right? And one of the reasons of looking back is just to have building blocks to build with, right? Because many Indigenous and African people have very little to nothing to build with, but build we do, right? And so it's about, like, the process is also about choosing who you want to be, right? Because it's also, I guess one of my mottos is the beauty of brokenness is actually being able to build freshly, right? And and the thing is that after being in a cult, that is something that you need to do, right? Is build fresh. But it's hard to build if you haven't, like, oh, I hate so many analogies, but like if you haven't gone through and verified, right, at least the foundation that you're building on before you start building. Because otherwise, especially when it comes to cults, you're going to be building on cult ideas. And if that happens, then you're still going to wind up going back to it again, which unfortunately is what historically happens, because when we don't take the time to detox these things, we keep perpetuating them because we've internalized them. That's the hard part.
I hear what you're saying, and I think so the question kind of comes from the idea too that where we get our culture, like if we're going to build new, right? Or maybe not even build new, but sort of like try to reach back and find what is still remnants of our culture and then incorporate them and integrate them into our own lives and our own identity. When we do that, it does feel a little bit like we're reacting to that concept of whiteness, and so that's why I asked the question. So my ancestors are Mexican, right, and before that, indigenous to the area of Mexico, so I have a really hard time with sometimes feeling like, do I want to connect more to Mexican culture, or is that Mexican culture just the erasure of my indigenous culture? And so it's a really difficult dilemma there because I don't, I want to connect more to my family. That's what I want to do in the end.
Yeah. That's the thing of it, right? And that's a normal step in the process. And I don't want to gently nudge or anything in any kind of direction, because to me, it's, I think, a process that each person does need to go through. But that is the difference, right, between nationality and ethnicity, and that differential that you just made. So like same, right? So I'm Cherokee and Blackfeet. But I like, for example, I loathe the term American and the nation state that is America, because for me and my people, it's like Mustache Man 1, And so I'm not going to call myself Mustache Man, but from another place, like that's not what I'm going to do. And so it's a hard thing for us to face, because it's part of how we've normalized and rationalized being able to cope with living in these environments, which is why, particularly for those of us that are kind of at that stage of reconnecting to the indigenous roots that you have, it is wildly difficult, because it's going to be layers of having to kind of burst that kind of bubble of self-identity, because that's the sinister nature of this system, is to give people so many different outlets of different ways to try to do that, but it's all leading back into feeding the system, which is why there are so many isms, for example.
That's so true. And they have made it very lucrative. They've made it very lucrative to connect back. So thank you for answering that question. And I'll let other people ask questions. I'm going to keep listening, but I really enjoyed that first little brain tickle that gave me.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Brain tickles are my favorite.
Love you, baby. I know that Pearl had a question.
Yeah, I'm still on the definition, because again, even within the within sociology and psychology, we have to have a foundational definition in order to base the rest of the application on. And so, and I'm still seeing, and again, this is more correcting, I just want to understand, but I still see a binary associated with culture when it comes to your definition. And so is there like foundational definition that you're utilizing from a book, or where is it, and then where is this branching coming from?
So the only binary that exists in what I'm sharing is healthy versus harmful. And that's not so much a binary, because the methods in which those things are exacted vary very widely, right? But the reason of making that the plumb line for those differentials is about, at least in my purview, the desire of the direction of where we want to go as a society, right? So instead of normalizing what is oppressive and harmful and calling it culture and thinking that, because the thing is that on a social scale, we associate culture with something that is to be held onto, that is to be prized, especially because of the identity crisis that we face societally because of colonization. So it's actually just about distinguishing harm versus healthy, and healthy connection to culture takes time, just like relationships take time. So it's about factoring in those things as to what we say is culture, and then how that gets folded into what are abusive patterns that get normalized and say, well, it's just tradition. It's been going on for a long time. Well, that doesn't make it cultural, because of the practice of, if what you're holding on to is just to systematically harm people for the sake of a superiority complex, that's where it crosses over into an ideology that is about gaining power, which brings into the power dynamic of what superiority complexes hold. So it's about the working functionality of these things in their expression. But I hope that helps distinguish, because it's not about good or bad, right or wrong, a morality check. It's about the results of what those behaviors do and how they impact people. And holding on to an ideology for the sake of superiority is harmful, and thus cult, right? When you look at the definition of cult, even in what psychology has said for many decades now, right? So, but when it comes to cultural connection, it is said to be what a group of people use as their connecting entity, right? With the kind of like the same page of what people are on as far as how to live. And so if we're saying that ideologies that systematically harm people are part of that fundamental structure, I do not believe that that is a healthy format, and hence the distinction. As far as there being another book that says what I'm saying, it is my own study. I've been studying psychology for 30 years, and talking on it around the world. So that is my contribution to the forward movement of these practices and ideas. So yeah, it is not going to be, especially in psychology today, you will see a lot of differential from what I say versus what they say, which is why I left it a couple decades ago, because it's still very whitewashed and still tries to normalize that for the sake of whiteness that is still leading this industry, but is why I make the distinctions I do, because it needs to not be. And that is the drum that I tend to bang these days, is how whiteness needs to not lead. And that's why it is so desperately important to listen to indigenous voices and African voices, because the ones we need to be listening to and following are the ones that have suffered the most from these things, so that we can be as sure as possible that we are not repeating what's currently going on.
Okay. I mean, I can't argue with your own deduction. Like, the only thing I can do is like talk to the generalization of the definitions. So your point of view is awesome and is amazing. And so, yeah, the only thing I could do is only talk, like, when it comes to a discussion like this, like, I was thinking more of a, like, generalized definition and foundational like that. So yeah, I can't argue with your personal deduction for sure.
I start to wonder if maybe the question becomes, what do I get to have access to? What do I get to have as part of my culture? And that might be the root of the confusion and the discourse around all this, is that we're looking at this and we're going, but what about me? And we're looking at it in terms of like, how do I fit into this whole idea? that's how I have been, like, that's the thing that keeps going through my mind is like, but what about me? Which is obviously like, that it's just going to be the first natural thing for me to do. That's part of my makeup is to go, but what about me? And I think that we have to get past that to get to the root of what Des might be trying to say, which is that it's not about whether or not we get access to a culture. It's about whether or not people in general have had access to their own culture. Because otherwise, the cult itself has erased it or has disintegrated it into an unrecognizable form.
I see you, Meezy. Hi.
Hi, Valkyrie. I just want to say I appreciate what everyone's saying, and I'm really listening to. And seeing I'm just like Valkyrie. I'm one of the only white tea people here. But I think I also want to say too, it is important to listen to Indigenous and Black voices because of the fact that a lot of YT people won't admit this, but I am related to extremely dangerous racists. And I mean, yeah, every racist is dangerous, but I guess when I look back, some of them that I'm related to were schmurderers. And, and seeing that just like Valkyrie, well, Valkyrie, do you have Mormon ancestry or no? Oh,
Oh
you
yeah.
do? Okay. Oh, yeah. So same here, and I'm related to the Ricks family. Do any of you know who the Ricks family is?
Idaho, Ricks College, that's what I'm putting together. But yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, they basically, Thomas Edwin Ricks, who is my fourth great grandfather, helped to basically orchestrate, he funded for the annihilation of the Shoshone population. And he even funded the Bear River Massacre or mass, I mean, sorry, TikTok purposes only, TikTok educational purposes only. Um, and and the thing is, I didn't even know what the Shoshone went through exactly until I actually heard Shoshone voices, because I personally just thought that my ancestors were bad for doing this. But I'm like, okay, but what about hearing the Shoshone voices, you know, and hearing like what their ancestors went through and what they saw? Not because I already heard what my ancestors did. I need to hear what they went. I need to hear what the victims went through. So I just want to say that it's very important to, just I guess, just piggyback on that. I think it was Des that said it, that we need to listen to Indigenous and Black voices. That's important too, because you can sit there, you can sit there and listen. You can sit there and say, "Oh, I'm YT and I'm related to racists." Okay, well, how are you gonna deconstruct? Because I deconstructed through family history, but also deconstructed through listening to voices of the indigenous population, because those were the people that were affected by my ancestors.
Yeah, and especially when it comes to that aspect of it, it's like in the face of what your ancestors. Whoopsie doodle, I almost dropped my phone. In the face of what the European ancestors have told you, particularly those that have been a part of those things, right? It's about understanding that they highly likely lied, if not about the events themselves, then probably dulled down how horrific they were, right, to normalize the things. And so that's one of the reasons it's so important to listen to Black and Indigenous people and to make sure that like their voices and their stories and their tellings of those events are the ones that we champion, right, that we put forth, and honestly should be in the history books, in my humble opinion.
Thank you, Des. Also, Des, I saw that you're trans mask. I was wondering, what are your pronouns?
Yes, he, they. Thank you for asking. I should have said when I got here. But yeah, thank you.
Her for me. I'm just kidding.
Oh, what? I missed it.
I love how she said,
Yeah.
Measy likes to throw us off and go back
You
to
said
his
she
mask,
heard from me.
her mask
You
voice
got it.
every once in a while.
I missed it at first. That's funny.
She gets a hoot out of it.
I'm actually still working on being able to relax my voice because I go like a half an octave up by instinct.
Yeah.
And I've been working on dropping it down so I sound better.
Yeah.
Well, to me, I feel better too.
Yeah, no, for sure. You know what's funny is not to get off topic here, but this is how I normally talk, and there was a guy with a transphobe that said to me, "Why you sound like a whole ass woman? You're a dude." And I'm like, "Wait a second, I sound like a woman?" I wasn't even offended by that. I was like, "Wait a second, I sound like a woman?"
Really? That's so affirming. Oh my god.
I know when a transphobe's affirming.
I know.
I
On
imagine.
accident, it's like
You're under affirming care. It's very kind of you.
I love it so much. I think
Yeah.
so. I think part of the reason why we're struggling with it is, number one, we had to come to the definition of the cult as part of our deconstruction of Mormonism. So to now find out that there might be another layer of having to find another way of defining cult, because it does feel like it is a different definition of cult, and it does feel like a different definition of culture. And I understand the distinction that you're making, and I think that it is a helpful one, because it is going to be less if you don't feel like your culture is going to be erased by examining the white supremacy that we were raised with, I can see why that would be less of a, if you can like not associate it to culture, why it might be an easier pill to swallow, or maybe more flexible thinking.
Yeah.
So I can see the benefit of it. But I also, at the same time, when we talk about just the classical definition of cult and culture, I don't see it fitting quite as well, because there are definitely, when it comes to being raised as a white individual in America, there are rituals that we have that I didn't realize that, is kind of a common theme that we have in our whiteness. To have that moment where you realize that it's not safe for you to speak up when you see harm. That's something that's, every time I've had that conversation or posed that question to another white person, it's the same age, between 3 to 7, and you have that moment that you can like, oh, yep, there was that one moment for me that I can think of, and so that whole idea and the way that we indoctrinate our boys to suppress their feelings except for anger, and that we then do that as when they're young, and then we reinforce that through the things that we emphasize for them and what we feel is most important, and what we stress is important for men and women and the gender roles, like just those types of, it's hard not to see that as a culture.
Well, the whole point is that it's just been called that for the sake of normalizing it. When you actually look at the definition of what a cult is, an ideology that takes identity, right? That is literally what it does. And all of those things that you mentioned as that are called, cultural practices, right? In this other definition of it, right? They're actually all abusive patterns, right? That's part of conditioning, especially when you're teaching it at developmental years, the whole like 2 to 7 teaching kids, those are developmental years. And so you're actually conditioning them at that point. And that's literally what keeps cults going. Because literally, like the separation of understanding around like not calling Christianity a cult. It actually fits the definition to a T.
Oh, it is.
For example, right? It is a cult, right? But we call it religion, or we call it culture, or we call it heritage, and all of the things that are to normalize the abusive cultish patterns that are there. And that's for the sake of the comfort of those that they're trying to get to ascribe to it. And that's what you will see cult leaders do across the board in them. And so it's really just about transforming, because it's about what we once accepted and thought was the safe space is actually not only not the safe space, it is actually the source of the problem that makes the space not safe. So it is about layers, but it is about an ideology that is being held over the lives of others, and thus just got normalized into those that have also been erased, but in different ways, right? So like white people got self-erased into whiteness. But before whiteness came around, right, in the 1450s, before that, what was happening to white people was largely getting erased for the sake of labor and religion, right? So when you start taking those things back, and I have like all of Western Europe and most of Scandinavia in my heritage, and I'm not saying that it's not difficult, right, to track these things down, but there are ways that when you're researching, right, not only will things like strike a chord, like this is the hard thing too, right? The way our society teaches us is to only go with what we can see and taste, and a lot of it is based on not trusting our senses, right? That's part of the self-erasure. And so as you're doing more of this research, you're actually be going to learning to trust yourself more. And a really important part of this is also to very importantly distinguish, and I give this to a lot of people, is that you're reconnecting, right? So like I was removed from all of my heritage and culture because I grew up in whiteness, right, with white people. And so that not erased not only my indigenous and African heritage, but also what I figured out way later, because it took more time to unpack that, is the European. And then to understand that even those distinguishing labels were forms from before racism that were used to quantify and manipulate the masses. And that's how we, nationalism, right? And capitalism was used to unify so that everyone's using the same credit. And that's also how exploitation of labor really came in, which is how white people, between religion and capitalism, white people really screwed themselves up, right? And then they just kept going outward with it and creating more. And that's how we got to racism. And it's the most recent one, and it's why it's the most horrific, because it's the one that's being enacted still the most today, and all the rest of them point to it and lift up racism. So
It's helping me to see it.
transforming.
It's helping me to see it if I look at it in terms of like the way that National Socialism, I'm going to try not to say the word here, entered into the conversation of culture and tried to say like we're restoring our culture, right? And they tried to say this is our heritage, this is our, all of that was a cult. That was a cult leader and a cult, right? That is easy for us to distinguish because it's sort of like, okay, here we go. This is somebody who tried to say the only reason that we are a culture or a heritage is because we are distinguishing ourselves through our ability to squash other people's cultures. And all of that becomes like readily apparent that we lost, because, my dad is, his family is from Germany, and it would have been, his family would have come here before all of that. So, I don't have any like direct idea of like maybe any family that would have been a-okay with what was happening in 1930s and 40s. But that concept to me becomes really easy to understand still, because it's like, well, but culture is important. So to be able to use somebody's culture and say, hey, yeah, our Germanness is what makes us special. That would be an easy thing for people to say, like, yeah, okay, I'm on board for that then. That's why I think maybe what you're saying is easier to understand is because I can kind of look at it and go, that's happened. That's what people like on on that scale of like, yeah, that's how that happened is they took that and you don't have to go. I feel like what people are thinking is that like we have to go like far, far back to be able to find that original culture or that culture that we do want to connect to. But I think the trap is to try to go and seek that out rather than trying to understand that you do come from somewhere and that somewhere does have traditions, dances, food, whatever you think of as culture, but those things don't necessarily need to be, what's the word, like recreated or reintroduced to yourself if all you're doing that for is to distinguish yourself. Am I making sense?
Yeah, I think I got you there with the last line anyway. Like
Yeah.
it's not the hard part is that because this is about identity, you start to feel lost, right? And so like what white people are holding on to is whiteness is a culture because that's what you were given. Yeah, please go.
Sorry, again, I'm still gonna challenge the thought because, again, like, to me, so I studied sociology, and so that's why I'm like, I get, like, I'm gonna go back to the books, right? And so, like, and I understand, like, and also these definitions, like, they're studied definitions. So that's why I want to go back to that. And also, people could always reference where the foundation comes from because it's going to always come back to that specific definition and that foundation. And so, like, I would literally say, like, cult sounds more like a noun, and I also could read like the definition itself, but like cult sounds like a noun, like a group of people, like a gathering of people, like a unit of people, right? And within that cult, they have specific acts that they perform, or the way of life, which way of life is continuous performance of existence, right? Have that culture within that unit that they perform on a daily basis that then encompasses their life. So therefore, like, culture to me, it does not really like have a distinct binary. It's not going to, like, culture doesn't just, like, I don't know, like, it's weird to me to say, like, okay, like, it's about building people, okay? So generally cultures are like within groups of people, right? And so who defines what's good for their people within that culture? Where is that definition coming from? And
Well, no,
so
the
it's weird to
people.
me that, like, culture is like only when it is like benefiting people in a good way, which is also subjective. And then, like, a cult all of a sudden is like this like negative entity, like this like action of bad, essentially. So that's where I'm having this disconnect, where like there's actual
I don't
foundational
understand. Yeah, I don't understand why you keep
definitions,
bringing it back to the good and the bad part.
because you keep going back to that binary.
No, I don't. I very specifically like cleared that up, that good and bad are subjective, and that's the problem, right? It's about what's healthy and what's harmful. And if what you're doing,
Okay, healthy and harmful are binaries.
well, yeah, but they're not, well, it's not a binary choice though, right? Like it's, like when you come to black and white, right? Those are assigned labels, right? That are not based on reality. Right. So when it comes to what is healthy, it is about the actual edification of the group of people that are coming together. That's the culture part, right? On how to live. But the reason it does cross over into being a cult is because a cult is an ideology, right, that's held up by a group of people. And it's one of the reasons that it gets conflated with culture, because culture is not only an ideology that unites people, it is actually the connection of those people coming together in practices that help them communally exist, right? And that's kind of the societal part, right? And so if one of those practices that you're having in there is at the expense of another demographic in your community, it is then a superiority complex and an ideology that is not being supported by a healthy communal living. And so and I do believe, well, I don't believe, and that is one of the distinction, like that's one of the problems of whitewashing this topic, is because having gone through the purview of those that are trying to make rational all the horrific atrocities that they have committed.
But the
Right. And so
thing is that, like,
conflating the
again,
understanding.
culture is the action of the agreed, like, way
Yeah.
of living. It's the action.
Yes.
So it's a shared as, like, definition wise, going back, it's a shared belief. They never said it's a shared belief that, like, enhances everybody, right? It's just a shared belief,
Well,
values,
yeah, it's a shared belief that they're choosing to live.
social norms. So the culture is a social construct
It all
because the
is.
people are the ones who create culture.
They create cults
Group,
too.
they, of course. But the thing is that I'm at this moment arguing on culture. People create culture. It's a social construct. And so people are going to do what's best for them and their group. So therefore, that does not mean that a separate group, like, as they're doing what's best for them, doesn't mean that it's going to coincide with the other's culture.
Right.
And so
But I made the
so
distinction.
like again, when it comes to being, what was your like, healthy or, like, not,
Harmful.
that's a binary. And also
No,
those
those are actionable
themselves
behaviors that you
are
can observe.
those, yes, like, which are social construct. The study, well, I guess
The labels are.
sociology actually has, like, biological aspects to it. But, like, when it comes to sociology, we study the social constructs that build or that influence the existence of people and why they live that way, why they create the cultures that they do, and we try to find that. But those things are are socially constructed by the
Yes.
group of people, therefore making it the culture.
But that's can be said of both things, cult and culture.
I understand that. So culture itself is neither bad or good or thriving collectively as humans in all.
Right.
It
I
can't be.
understand. It's about the group of, that's why I said it's about a group of people coming together and agreeing on an existing way to live. But the thing is that, and I wasn't even, I see, and you had to go outside of the collective people that we're talking about to exercise the thing that you were saying, right? Is
But the
that
thing is that, like,
saying,
sorry, I'm in trouble. Go ahead.
well, I was doing it to you too. I'm sorry. I shouldn't do it. You just stop me. I'll mute myself is why I try to do that. I do apologize. It sucks. The, the thing is that when you're in a collective of people, those things are the same, except for how they actionably play out. Right? That's why I keep going to that point, right? The difference between the cult and the culture is going to be its impact, because it's going to be about how that society and what they come together on, right? And so when it comes to actual, like, what we're trying to value, right, as culture, it's about if you want to include the ideologies that also make up cults in that culture. And my point of this part is saying that no, we do not want ideologies that get used as cults as part of the culture, because culture involves the intimacy and the connectivity of the society of people that we're talking about, which is why healthily society going when it is observed that what's being done in that ideology is harming a demographic of people in that collective group, that it's not going to then be culture, something that should be held onto, but should be observed as this is harmful to us and should not be a part. And so that's why I'm trying to say it's about the actionable parts of what we're doing these things as, because that conflation is part of how we normalize abusive, harmful behaviors.
Okay, I definitely. Go ahead.
I just know Evolving had something they wanted to add. And
But
then
unfortunately,
I
you have to
a
go
question
too.
so.
But Black Magnolia, I will follow you, and we can definitely keep having the conversation. But I gotta go because I gotta make the food for the folks. But it is a pleasure, and thank you guys. I enjoy the stimulation
Des.
of the brain waves. So thank you guys.
Yep.
Appreciate it.
Greetings. How you guys doing?
Hi, Evolving. Good. How are you? Tell me a little bit about yourself.
Thank you. I am 41. I am a solutions-focused activist of over 30-something years. I've never been really indoctrinated. I've never believed in this system a day in my life. I've never believed in any denomination of religion, even though I recognize that that there is a source to to all things, cause and effect and such. And with respect to the conversation that was going on, I make no distinction between culture and cult. I recognize that the prefix of culture is cult for a reason, because all cultures are cults. We don't define them as such because of the numbers alone, the actual amount of people who subscribe to it. It's the majority as opposed to the minority, which is what cults usually are. But if you remove that numbers population distinction and you look at the tenets of cults, they share one divine, obvious trait, which is that they believe some shit that they cannot prove to everybody else. They believe something and are wrapping their worldview around that belief. Cultures do the same thing. Our food is the best. Our music is the best. Our clothing is the best. The way we talk and the way we move, our culture is the best. And even when that's like the worst case, the best case scenario, they don't think that it's the best. They engage in it as if it's objective. Cults and cultures engage with reality as if their way of life is objective, as if it's the scientific method, as if their culture was devised at all by implementing logic, reason, or the scientific method. Cults and cultures do the same shit. The difference between a cult that I cannot fuck with, like the United States of America, society, authority, government, and culture, is because the ability to consent is never there with a cult. You can consent to a culture, or you can revoke your consent to a culture. You can disengage from the culture. You will be ostracized. This is best case scenario. You will be ostracized. You will be bullied. You will be outcasted. You will be banished. That's best case scenario, because worst case scenario is they incinerate your ass. So as far as I'm concerned, culture is horrific because it gives way to the cult. It gives way to the idea that reality is subjective and that whatever humanity makes up along the way is valid because we're the ones doing it. The scientific method is the first human construct, social construct, that literally stepped back and said, hey, you know what? Maybe whatever we're doing at any given moment isn't the objective way it has to be, isn't the objective way that it should be. And so the scientific method, along with the trivia method, allows us to step back and weigh our livelihood and our lifestyles against objectivity. And that objectivity is nature. So cults are unsustainable. Cultures, at the very least, have a reference point to sustainability. How many times? It wasn't until fucking Captain Planet that the United States started giving a shit about sustainability. It's the world. Anywhere you see unsustainability and a lack of consent is where you see a cult. That's literally China, Russia, Hong Kong, or not Hong Kong, North Korea, South Korea, any place where people are arbitrarily making shit up and then imposing it on other people is cult. But the foundation, cult and culture work in tandem. They work in tandem because culture is cult. And people will say, oh, it's just a coincidence. I'm like, I don't believe in that shit. Like, I don't believe in that's a coincidence. It literally is the prefix because it is the foundation. And when you break it down etymologically, the word culture actually says cult you are. Because just like just like the word are, like are we here yet? R does not require the E to make the full R sound. You can still spell R, A-R, and people get the fucking point. So culture doesn't need the R. And what it actually phonetically says is cult you are. And if you subscribe to a culture, you're in a cult. I don't subscribe to African American culture. I don't subscribe to nationalist culture. I don't subscribe to the myriad of so-called cultures on this planet because none of them have been weighed against the scientific method. Not a one. So that's my position on it. But I agree with the person that's on the bottom to a certain extent, but I predominantly agree with Des, and me and Des are mutuals, that the assertion and the pushing or the imposing of so-called ways of life is always cult, especially when it's based on coercion, which is a form of violence, and extortion, and all of the many ways that the societal pressures and the quote unquote cultural pressures and authoritative and institutionalized pressures weigh on our lives. Is it objective that I need a fishing license to remove fish from bodies of water? Is it objective that I need permission, which is what a permit is, to build an extra room on a house that I pay for? No, these are beliefs that have been rendered law through common delusion, also known as culture.
Thank you. You guys are making me give all kinds of thoughts, and I love it because the brain tingles are definitely happening. Would it be therefore a logical step if they are related to say that what culture is a cult that has grabbed hold and found its way into a group, and they have actually solidified and made that, like, they've adapted that cult to the point that they now identify as that cult, and they've said, this is who I am, and therefore cult becomes culture when it gets adopted and
Takes the masses
and becomes that a sign that and ultimately really what I think it is, both of them, culture and cults, can actually impede interconnectedness. And that's the issue, is if we get stuck on cults and culture, we're still going to run into the same issue, which is we're going to still feel siloed. We're still going to feel like we're imposing on each other without actually sharing and each other's experiences and enjoying each other's experiences and histories and stories, and then being able to intermingle and have connectedness between those things. We're going to, if we keep it culture, we're going to feel that that's appropriation, and rather than an exchange or understanding.
It's another form of tribalism. I call culture the grandmother of supremacy. And I have a website dedicated to all this. I got free books on there. Everything on there is free. It's a complete solutions focused activism website. We do mutual aid, all kinds of shit. But the entire point, the education featured on my website, we have a book called The End of All Evil, and we have a book called The Most Dangerous Superstition. And the point of both of these books, who are critically acclaimed, is that society, culture, authority, and government are religious, faith-based, dogmatic belief systems. And we're free to believe whatever we want. The problem is when it becomes imposed. So a culture isn't inherently bad. A cult isn't inherently bad. The problem is that they have no relationship to objectivity. The reason why indigenous cultures actually had a card to play, and this is the reason why I refer to them as opposed to like try to emulate them so much, is because they largely didn't impose their culture on people. When we're talking about, native indigenous cultures, Australian indigenous cultures, certain African, like ancient ass indigenous cultures such as the Dogon, the Mali, the Sun, they actually engaged in egalitarian cultures. But I actually subscribe to the original. If I'm going to subscribe to a culture is going to be the original people. And I'm talking about the first fucking 8 people on the planet. Because that is a place where, because when I look at history, no matter what skin color we're looking at, when you look at a people, and some people were born in their community that said, you know what, I think you guys' food is great, think your dances are cool, think your outfits are awesome, your makeup's great. I don't want to do it though. I want to do something else. How many times in history, from any skin color, did people go, hey, you know what? Hey, no hard feelings. We would love to, help you set up wherever you go, pack you with some nice shit to help you on your way. No, most of the time, best case scenario, they were bullied, ostracized.
Right.
So, and just to land it with this, if when the person and the concept that I appreciate the most that helped teach me this is Captain Picard and the various captains on Star Trek, because they did not appropriate anybody's culture, but they celebrated everybody's culture they came in contact with, celebrated it very authentically, and no part of their own life needed to assimilate that culture to function. And so that is where I appreciate the concept of cultures while still not fucking participating at all.
Right. Right. No, I'm really liking that. This is making more. This is connecting connects. Um, I watched a documentary last night. Was that just last night? I think it was. That I was like, okay. First of all, I was gardening and I was woo up there, and it was amazing. The neurons were firing heavy, heavy, heavy. But there's a documentary that I watched, and I texted my friends and I said, "Oh my God, I've never felt as spiritual than watching this documentary that I was watching." And it's like about trees. Hang on, what was it called? It's gonna drive me crazy.
Oh my God, I think I know what you're talking about. The one about the is it like the disappearing trees or the something like that?
No,
Oh, okay.
no, it's over here. It's like God damn it. It's anyways, I'll find it. Anyways, the thing that I liked about it was they were actually talking about how when it comes to old forests, and the reason why replanting isn't working is because we're doing plantation planting and essentially doing one type of tree, and that's it. When we replant a forest after cutting it down, but that's not what needs to happen. And so that as they've been studying it, old forests, and then these scientists have been doing their own parallel studying, they've actually discovered that healthy forests have mother trees. And these are really, really old trees, and even stumps that are like cut down, they fall down and they don't have any tree above the ground, but their roots are all still alive down underneath. And because of the interconnectedness in these old forests, trees talk to each other. Trees share each other. When there's trauma that happens, they actually send the trauma signal through the roots, through the fungi under the soil to other trees, so that they're prepared for when the beetles come to attack them. But the idea that there's like mother trees that forests build around, but they're not isolated. They are all still connected to other forests as well. Across the entire globe, all the forests are connected to each other through their root networks. And so the idea of having cultures kind of equates to that mother tree idea, that we have like this thing that kind of connects everybody to the land to where they are and allows them to flourish and grow and communicate with each other, and they need each other as a whole to be a healthy forest. Sorry, I'm going to totally butcher this. But that is also connected to the mother trees over here, and they talk to each other, they share information with each other, but they are still their own mother trees and their own and their own old forests, their healthy forests.
The only thing that I would say with that is that because culture, like, let's go with religion. Religion is a certain kind of culture. Religion, the word religion means to tie back to, or to tie back, or to thwart from forward progress. It comes from the Latin religare. So, yes, when you look at the word religion, and it could mean tie back from forward progress, or to tie back to get you back, to remind you, of the ways in which and the mechanisms in which they got you to the point, a positive point that you can return to. But the problem with culture versus the trees example is that all 100% of the information that the trees are transmitting in that root system is objective. They're not sending over their opinions. Well, I feel like the beetles belong here. And the other tree sitting here, well, I think the beetles are bad for us. And somebody else is like, well, I don't even really care about the beetles. They're not transmitting their perspective, their opinions, their worldviews, their indoctrination, their brainwashing, their grooming, because that's what most cultures, especially if we're talking about outside of the delusion of, not accusing anybody here, but outside of the delusion that societies are what they claim to be: conducive, equitable, progressive, sustainable, etc., or at least reaching for sustainability, etc. Aside from that, the tree system is dealing with, as all creatures besides humanity does, are dealing with objectivity, and it has been brainwashed, indoctrinated, and groomed into the average Western worldview that everything is subjective, everything is your opinions. I had somebody tell me that a man could walk off a cliff, and if he didn't believe that he would get taken at terminal velocity, it wouldn't happen. That's how deep people, and I know he's full of shit, and I know he knows he's full of shit, but on a worldview, it's called relativism. Some people, it could be called moral relativism, but the idea that however I feel and whatever I think about any given stuff, this is why we can't deal with racism. This is why we can't deal with sexism. Objectivity. Men don't want to look at the landscape of what's going on with gender affairs objectively. Oh, it's not all men. It's not all men. Because I feel like I'm being included in that conversation of harmful men. It's not all men. And racist people, oh, I can't be racist because XYZ. Well, what are you doing to not be racist? You see what I'm saying? So this idea that we can sit in a place of complete subjectivity in an objective environment is ludicrous. It is the foundational problem with everything. In fact, and on my website, we call it supremacy. Supremacy itself is a delusion because nature is supreme. And if there's anything over nature, that shit's supreme. But the least thing supreme is any form of human, because we are all admittedly, quote unquote, equal under the law. This is how I've mathematically been able to determine that all forms of government and so-called authority are inherently illegitimate, is because nobody has the rights that a government claims as an individual, and government claims that its powers is made of the rights of the individual. How can you have rights if I create you and make you? How can you have rights that I don't have? It doesn't make any sense. It's called proper delegation. And that makes society stand primarily as a cult. And the minute that it becomes where your ability to consent to it is being revoked, that's when it becomes violence. And that's when it becomes something that that doesn't have any legitimacy. And that's where I stand on it. Culture in and of itself is not a bad thing, but the idea that whatever culture is doing at any given time is okay so long as they subjectively think it's okay. Like, this isn't about good and bad. It's about sustainable and unsustainable. So as far as I'm concerned, all cultures are out of their fucking minds. But at least the ones that had their culture founded around sustainability, hey, grandpappy's in them trees, grandma's in that river, so you don't want to piss in it and you don't want to cut it down. It may not be science, but at least it's reasonable. What we have in the United States and what people call the United States culture, consumerism. People equate consumerism with culture. That's wild.
Well, and I think that's where I'm coming in with this idea that we may not need to go and find our culture. This is why I guess I'm advocating for the concept of maybe we don't need to go back so far as, I think Cappy said, Stonehenge, right? That's like where we need to go and find ourselves, or how we need to find ourselves. I think that if we do that, what we end up doing is subscribing to an idea that isn't really our initial culture. Anyway, it's the idea given to us from the remnants of that culture. It's not even our culture. It's not even our original culture. I guess that's all I'm trying to say, is that we can't really find it anyway. So to seek it out would probably end us up where we are losing more than what we would gain anyway.
That's the way I feel.
We need
Oh, sorry, excuse
heritage,
me.
recognition of heritage, because there's nothing wrong with heritage. There's nothing wrong with history. So that's the thing. I recognize my heritage because it helps to inform my presence, my present. Um, so when it comes like my culture is the culture of anti-culture. I subscribe to anarchy. I subscribe to abolition. I recognize that the books I mentioned earlier, they have one whole point that they mention just repeatedly through the whole thing. And it's the point of the whole books. Because we're all equal under the law, no institution of man can have more power or be more important on this earth than you. You. And they spend $1 billion a second to make it so nobody ever figures this out. That last Kendrick concert, that's so they don't figure this out. Your favorite TV show, that's so you don't figure this shit out. You, individual little old you, there is a baby out there that was born with no legs, no arms, and no teeth. And that motherfucker's still more important than every institution that has ever existed, including whatever built them fucking pyramids. It's made up. It's made up. It's all of it. Somebody earlier said it's all construct. It was either the other person that was here or Des. It's all a construct, yes. And why do I have to be subject to your constructs? Where's the irrefutable, inherent, scientifically valid evidence that I am obligated, bindingly? That's why Martin Luther King said you are under no moral obligation to obey unjust laws. So why the fuck would you be under any moral obligation to obey an unjust system or an unjust culture or an unjust institution or an unjust so-called version of authority? You're not. We are like, I'm the culture of godhood. Like, if you can't open up the clouds and tell me what to do, you can't tell me what to do. Sorry. Unless I'm harming somebody, which I deliberately don't do so that I can continue to do whatever the fuck I want.
Did I lose everybody?
No, but just while it's quiet, I want everybody to know we do have a full service mutual aid network. So if anybody out there is hurting, having trouble paying bills, having trouble keeping the car running, gas in the tank, don't wait till it's too late. Don't wait till you're about to get kicked out. Please hit us up. We have a network of people. We're resourceful people, but we don't have the most resources because we're not the United States government. We're just average motherfuckers helping each other out. So if you need help, please get at us. We also have free books available.
Sorry about that. I had a potty emergency. So thank you.
You're okay. I'm about to have a gardening emergency right now.
Very important.
Yeah, thanks for
Intelligent
mentioning
trees.
So
That's the name of it.
Oh, okay.
It was one of those ones I was like, spiritually awakening for me. So.
Yeah, it's interesting because with like the tree analogy too, Sarah, when you were talking about that, it was making me think about how, like when trees get diseased and then that disease spreads through. And I'm not sure if it mentioned or talked about all of that, but it is one of those things where like, you have to take down the trees that do have the disease or else the entire place goes down, right? But nature figured out a way to make that work, and we intervene way too often. We intervene way too often to make this like it reminds me of the way that we sometimes will go like, no, we need to just cut things and we need to just like remove and delete and all, like all the ways that especially American culture tries to say, well, if something is difficult, let's just make it let's just get rid of it. Let's just get rid of things that make things harder. I think that we don't follow our innate, like we aren't letting ourselves do the natural thing.
Our nature through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
which is why everybody feels okay with calling out the 1%, because they're like, that doesn't matter. The rest of us will thrive. Get rid of those those problematic 1% people out there who can't subscribe to what we think is correct. And I think that's kind of where Pearl was going. Black Magnolia was who gets to decide what is harmful, because a collective people with one culture can say our culture isn't harmful for us, but in fact it's harmful for a different people.
Yeah.
And so
That's why John
that's kind
Lennon
of where I was
said,
getting stuck too.
I don't believe in isms, I just believe in me, like the ism thing gets into the way of actually getting into what you are and who you are. And I'm not saying that John Lennon is right about everything. I'm just using a quote to make a point. So if anybody's going to get mad at me about John Lennon, just don't. I already know he's an imperfect human. Yeah.
Yeah. Aren't we all? Oh God, now I got a whole lot of things to think about. I love it. Thank you.
Yeah, and I don't know if you missed it, but there was talk of a mutual aid, and I don't know if you wanted to.
Yep, I heard that.
Okay.
I did hear that because I had to do it in my ear. I just muted him.
Gotcha.
I didn't want to interrupt the speaking, so I was like, "Oh no, let me just go take care of that real quick." No, this has been awesome. I think that I'm going to read my chapter now. We've kind of done our discussion beforehand, and that's awesome.
I'll drop down and mute so that you can keep going.
Absolutely, and thank you. I'm
Those
going to
books
drop you
and
down
a video. I'm gonna put the video in the comments too, so you guys, it's really enthralling.
Perfect. Yes, thank you. I appreciate it, and thanks for jumping up and for all the thoughts. And I'm definitely going to have to listen to the replay on this one a couple times so I can see if my brain can make sense of any of it, because there's tickles there, which is good. That means that the connections are reaching out. The Most Dangerous Religion. Oh yeah, by Larkin Rose. Okay. Thank you. Oh my God, sorry. I'm gonna yawn. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and drop you. Thanks for popping up here, Evolving Seeds. I appreciate it so much.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Enjoy. All right. Thanks everybody for coming for my reading time. Yeah, there will be posting too, for sure.